Times reports today that ministers have been told that millions of public sector workers, including teachers and nurses, should be given above inflation pay rises. It says that independent pay review bodies representing more than 500,000 teachers and 1.3 million NHS workers have both recommended pay rises of about 5.5%. Well, that is significantly more than the 3% the government budgeted for and creates a significant headache for the new Chancellor Rachel Reeves as she prepares for her first budget. The new government has repeated its warnings of the dire state of the public finances. But if it does not accept the pay recommendations, it could lead to clashes with the unions. Well, let's talk to Daniel Kebede, General Secretary of the National Education Union. Good afternoon to you, Daniel.
Good afternoon.
Good to have you with us. What do you make of these recommendations, which the Times is reporting today, of increases of around 5.5% for many teachers?
Well, it's important to say that the STRB report has not been published yet, so this is speculation, but we have been campaigning for an above-inflation pay award this year because education is in the midst of a deep and severe recruitment and retention crisis. We currently have class sizes where 1 million children are in classes of 31 or more. We can't recruit and retain, and we do really need that above-inflation pay award to get people into the profession, but most importantly, to keep them in.
But what we
And also, it's fair. It's fair to get them pay restoration from where they were in 2010. They have consistently been underpaid from all of these public sector pay freezes from the Osborne administration up until now. They have very little money to live on for a very stressful job that they have. Again, people will talk all the time about, oh, but they get so much time off. They really don't. You don't get evenings free when you're a teacher. It's a really grueling job. And on top of that, you have to deal with kids. So even outside of the correct assertion that he's made here, that we need to fix recruitment and retention by ensuring people are paid well enough that they don't end up going into the private sector, because essentially the wages were stagnant because the government deliberately made it so, because they didn't want to have to compete with the private sector. They wanted the private sector to have control over the labour market without being undermined by public sector wages. That's why people are going to be leaving the profession and aren't going to be coming back. It's exactly the same what we've been saying with things like junior doctors. If they can get better pay in other industries and elsewhere, we will lose people who we need in these public sector roles.
We've been hearing from the new government since it was elected, from the new Prime Minister, from Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, saying, well, look, we've had a look at the books and things are even worse than we expected. The public finances are very tight indeed. We are currently, the deficit is about 100% of our GDP, and they are going to have to keep a very tight rein on things. I mean, won't you and your members simply have to accept that?
Well, we would welcome the publication of the STRB report. If it is 5.5%, then the onus is on government to implement that and, most importantly, fund it. Schools are crying out for funding, and it would be highly problematic for that award not to be funded. It would lead to a worsening crisis in education. You know, we don't have enough support staff. Children with SEND are not getting the support they need. But MPs had a 5.5% pay award this year. There is the wealth in the economy to fund it, and so I would hope that Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer would. Failure to implement it would be highly problematic and inflammatory.
Yeah, I mean,
and he says it right. There is plenty of money in this economy. We are the 6th biggest economy in the world. We've got more billionaires than we've ever had, yet we can't pay teachers enough. So that the point where some of them having to use food banks, and we can't recruit or retain enough of them to have teachers to be able to have well-educated children to be productive people for the economy later on, for continuing the doom loop. Because exactly what I said before about this intent of the Labour government to get growth before they invest any money from the state. All it's doing is sending us into a doom spiral of no growth at all, because one of our reasons for poor growth in our economy, as well as a lack of investment in the private sector, is also a lack of investment in the public sector, in terms of obviously the buildings themselves, but also in the staff themselves, making sure that we have enough people teaching or doing healthcare, for example. And that is leaving our population in a worse position in terms of our own economy. It's making them less productive.
I'm looking at a vote that was held earlier this year where the National Education Union voted to hold a formal strike ballot if they reject the summer's pay offer. I mean, does that indicate that if you don't get what the independent pay review bodies formally propose, that you would be prepared to walk out on strike again?
Well, that was an indicative ballot, but it would have reached the legal threshold had it been a formal ballot. 90% of our members, on a turnout of over 50%, voted yes to strike action for a fully funded, above inflation pay award. Now, we absolutely want to avoid a situation like that. So it's really important that we see the STRB report published. And if it is a 5.5% pay award, that is implemented with the appropriate funding.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at figures from the Institute for Fiscal Studies saying that that would cost around an extra £3 billion. I mean, if the Department for Education, if schools were told that they simply had to find that money from their own budgets, would that be a way for the government to avoid having to raise taxes or raise borrowing?
I mean, you could just raise taxes. Equalise income tax and capital gains tax. That's enough for the junior doctor's pay award. And on top of that, you'd also get the teacher's pay award, you'd get the two-child benefit cap, and you could renationalise Royal Mail just with that one tax.
I think government need to recognise, and I'm sure they do, the crisis in funding that exists in education at the moment. And I appreciate there are tough choices to make, but the energy giants made £420 billion in profit during the cost of living crisis. There is wealth in this economy to fund a fully funded above inflation pay award for teachers and all public servants. And considering that Labour got elected on a manifesto of 6,500 new teachers and a new deal for working people, I would recommend that they publish it and implement and fund it.
And what if they don't?
But then I think strike action would be inevitable.
Well, that's it. That's what we're looking forward to. A Labour government in power did not mean the end to strike action, because again, this is going to be something they're going to really come up against. Loads of public sector workers who've had 14 years of continual wage freezes from the Conservatives are going to expect some kind of pay restoration. And if Labour can't give it to them because their own fiscal rules say that they won't do, because they have to do day-to-day spending out of tax receipts and they've promised not to raise taxes, and they don't want to raise other taxes for electoral reasons, they are going to end up having to come to a head with the unions. That's going to be an inevitable consequence. When, of course, this is a political choice that they've made. The fiscal rules they adhere to are a political choice, and the desire to not raise taxes, also a political choice. They've made a choice to not tax the super rich. They have made a choice to rule out borrowing for short-term gain on things that are necessary to be able to create the growth, to be able to wipe that out. Because we're not really at a point where a structural deficit in terms of things that are outside of growth projections is really relevant because the Phillips curve is flat. There's no reason to not at least try and find a way of trying to get these public sector pay rises for people who are then going to consume in the economy, which is going to create growth regardless. It's as simple as that. So if they end up having to be on the wrong end of strike action from public servants, like, that's their own fault for things that they have self-imposed, things they've done to themselves in terms of why they won't raise taxes and why they won't borrow for short-term spending.
What makes you say that?
Well, the STRB process is the government's process. It's not our process. As the General Secretary of the largest education union in Europe, I would far rather prefer directly negotiating with government the teacher pay award. However, we have an independent pay review body process. It's the government's process. They would have made that recommendation. And so it would be on government to implement it. You have to bear in mind that last year, Gillian Keegan, Jeremy Hunt and Rishi Sunak implemented a 6.5% pay award based on the STRB's recommendation following our dispute.
But we're the good guys. You can't strike when the red team is in. It should be banned.
Well, that's the problem, right? Is that there was loads of kind of sympathy with the trade unions when the Conservative Party are in power. I wonder how much sympathy there'll be for the trade unions now that Labour are in power. I bet all of the Liberals who are standing Mick Lynch for attacking the Tories for calling Chris Philp a liar will immediately turn tail and say, oh, you're damaging Starmer, you're being a Tory enabler, for the union leaders when they ballot for strike action against the Labour government. It turns out, right, the red team and the blue team aren't that different after all.
Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves were not going to follow suit, that would be doing something that even the last Conservative government did not do. It would be highly problematic. And it would set us off to a very bad start, which would be incredibly unfortunate considering the work that Bridget Phillipson has put in to resetting the relationship with the profession.
Do you fear, though, nonetheless, given everything we've heard from Rachel Reeves, that the government may want to set the tone for other public sector pay rises as well by turning around and saying, look, under the current circumstances, these are simply not increases that we can afford. We have to stick to the 3% for this year, even if they can afford something a bit more beyond that further down the line?
Well, because they can afford it. They are choosing not to afford it by not increasing taxes. They literally can afford it, but they are making a choice not to.
Well, the government has choices to make around how to raise further revenue. Should that be needed. But as I said, there is certainly the wealth in the economy to ensure that there are fully funded pay awards across the public sector, and government should follow suit. They were elected on a new deal for working people. Teachers, doctors, nurses, support staff, civil servants, they have had their pay eroded over the past decade, and our public services are in absolute dire straits. Health and education both have severe recruitment and retention crises driven by low pay and high workloads. Now, to reset, the number one signal of a reset would be fully funded pay awards.
As you mentioned, one of the key pledges from the new government is to recruit 6,500 new teachers. Are you clear yet how that is going to be achieved and what the timescale on that is going to be?
They're going to pull them from the magic teacher tree, clearly, at times of incredibly low unemployment, when they also want to reduce immigration as well. They said they want to. Well, where is this going to come from? Where's the money going to come from to train these teachers? Where's the people going to come from that actually want to do the training? And how are you going to get people out of the private sector into the public sector when you're not offering substantial public sector pay increases to compete? And you can't just pull the new teachers out of the hat, can you?
Well, I've seen that the Department for Education are launching new adverts, and those are welcome. But the fact of the matter is, teacher pay has declined by 25% since 2010. The last government has consistently missed its recruitment targets, and we are hemorrhaging the experience from our classroom, and that is incredibly wasteful. For every 6 teachers you lose, you have to re-recruit 10 because not all complete the course or go into the state sector. And education is very much on its knees, and that's why we need this urgent action from government.
Daniel Kebede, General Secretary of the National Education Union. Thank you so much for joining us.
That was excellent. Yeah, really taking the Labour government to task, making it clear, right? We are happy to hear that they're trying to reset the relationship, but the lines that they have on these things, such as public sector pay awards, are based in political choices rather than unchangeable realities. It is explicitly a choice that they have made to not raise tax while issuing public sector pay increases. Again, which would fix the recruitment and retention problem. Like, there's no way you're going to be able to recruit these people if they can get a better wage elsewhere, whether it's in a different country or in the private sector or stacking shelves at Tesco, especially if it is much lower workload, which is also going to have to be reformed too to make teaching easier as well. So there's plenty here from Daniel that are excellent criticisms of the government. But I wonder how long it will take before we start the union leaders being called Tory enablers for playing hardball with the Labour government. Again, this is a Labour government that has continually tried to push away the union movement. It can't claim these people have allegiances with them anymore because they've clearly made every opportunity to undermine the links between the Labour Party and the trade unions. And so if they do start having strike action that undermines their electoral mandate and their governance, they've only got themselves to blame for that. They've only got themselves to blame for what they've done internally with the unions. They've only got themselves to blame for not raising taxes, and they've only got themselves to blame for not increasing the pay awards for public sector workers. It's only their fault if that happens. Hey there, if you enjoyed the video, make sure that you like and leave a comment. That helps the video out in the algorithm. If you subscribe and ring the bell, it'll let you know when I go live. I stream every day on YouTube and Twitch. You can also follow all of my socials down in the description. And if you want to support me in a more financial manner, there's a join button for membership to just 99p to be a member on YouTube, as well as a Patreon, and there's some merch there as well. And hopefully I'll catch you on the next video. Take care.